Evening, everyone. First up, a massive thank you to the LondonGophers organising team. As a first-time speaker, I am absolutely bowled over by the support, the professionalism, and everything else that's gone into making this something that I can do. So thank you to all of them. I encourage anyone that's interested in talking to get in touch, because it's been absolutely delightful. Beyond the tour, I'm normally the guy that turns up at the meetups and sort of sits in the back corner, listens to the talks, thinks they're interesting, and then eats the pizza, runs off home, and then tries to learn a bit of Go to make up for my lack of knowledge. But a couple of years ago, I took the tour. If you want to know why I took the Go tour and decided to learn Go, then come find me afterwards. It's a different story. But this is almost an experience report of life beyond the tour and how I decided to progress. This is where I found myself, having finished the tour, grasped the syntax, aware of the headline features, but I don't develop for a living. I don't have massive backlog of development problems to go and tackle. So I didn't really have anything to go and use my newfound skills with. I felt I knew Go. I could claim I knew Go. I'd finished the tour, right? That means I know the language. But I wasn't confident. Give me a blank screen and tell me to solve a problem, and I was struggling. And I really didn't know where to turn next. And if you hang around in the Gopher Slack, particularly in the newbie channel, you will have seen the Gopher bot. And it's a fairly common question. This is not a Go question. This is a fairly common beginner's question in any topic. Is show me some resources that tell me how to get to where I want to go, and tell me how to learn this thing. And this is what GopherBot will spit out. And if you're not satisfied with the first page, there's another page, and it carries on. And these are all absolutely brilliant resources. And there's a wealth of videos and a wealth of well-written blog posts that you can go and read. And I did. And they're fascinating. And there's a whole world of technical problems, but none of them were problems I faced. I had just sort of grasped the syntax, and I couldn't quite relate. And that's the problem I set out to solve. So a little bit about me before I sort of jump into the journey. My day job, I'm called somewhere between a technology or a systems architect, and you could ask, how can somebody with that job title not write code for a living? I agree with you. I'm trying to solve that problem. I think there's a whole load more that we can do here. Come find me afterwards. I have plenty to say on the topic. But things I've enjoyed doing, online retail, Black Friday, scalability, taking legacy retailers and figuring out how to make them survive Black Friday with sort of trading systems that weren't built for the internet era has been great fun. Digital banking, mainframes, particularly when done globally, is quite interesting at how systems diverge, and trying to present sort of digital front ends on top of that. Great hands-on experience with that lot. But more recently, I've really enjoyed acting as a sounding board, which is this is sort of unusual for me. I mentioned I'm the guy that sits at the back in quiet and doesn't really say hello to anyone. But I found suddenly that I actually enjoyed talking to people who were new in the industry, new with their careers, and it was a sort of eye-opener to me that this was something I actually enjoyed doing as part of my job. Things I want to do next include cloud native, because I've done so much work with legacy systems, but more Go. But why am I here? Why me? Why stood here? Other than Dom asking for people to speak for the first time. I was talking in a Slack channel on a Slack workspace called Code Buddies, which is set up to help people who are learning by themselves find others to learn with, because it's quite often a lonely experience to try and learn something by yourself at home behind a computer screen. And I was talking about one of the projects that I'd been working on, and I got this question. This is a wonder of mine. From all the things you can do, you choose to make a bot for this shitty app. Sorry for my language. You could brush this off, but this actually made me stop and think. The thing I was working on was something to help manage communities in Slack and allow you to report messages like this. But this really did make me stop and think, and that's why I'm here. I'm here to explain why I've been working on silly projects. And it's about my journey beyond the Go tour, to try and give myself some confidence with the language, to try and give myself the ability to kind of relate to the talks that I see that are absolutely interesting, fascinating, but sort of disconnected from what I'd been learning. So I started with a tour. And I didn't know what to build. And Amy Codes has been learning Go for a while, and she posted this, and she posted it back in 2016. But I saved it as an interesting project that I might like to tackle one day, and this was the first thing that I found. Next project for internet technology, make a BitTorrent client in Go. This sounded like a great place to start. Yeah, it was baptism of fire. I like this because it's internet technology. This was clearly a learner's project. But also I knew nothing about how peer-to-peer networking worked, and this felt like an opportunity to learn. And I did it. I managed to download, this was a screenshot of me downloading a video and a whole heap of print statements to try and work out what was going on. It took a while. I actually set myself a completion criteria of downloading and booting from a Linux ISO, which was a little bit more problematic. But I'm not going to go into how I built it, why I built it. It's a mess. It's horrendous. It really was a baptism of fire. Bugs that appear 77 megs into a download quite consistently are really difficult and annoying to reproduce. But what did it teach me? Battling through this, a pointless client that I'm never going to use and I'm just going to throw away, what did I learn from it? Use all the things. I went back and looked at the code, and this is the list of packages, all of them except one, that I ended up using. And there's a fair few in there that you probably wouldn't expect to see in a beginner project. But this is massively powerful. A huge amount of the code was written just using the standard library. And if, again, go back to the Gophers Slack channel, and you'll see just use the standard library as quite a common response to questions. Fine, I'll use the standard library, but actually you can use the standard library to do a whole lot of really quite complicated stuff. But when you do, and you don't know what you're doing, you end up with code like this. That fourth line in there was my solution to deadlocks, and I had code that was littered with this. And because the scheduler is, you can't determine how it's going to behave, this was me basically saying, I know better than the Go runtime scheduler, fix my problems for me, and just make the thing work. So these inconsistent crashes of the application, the fact that once, by luck, I managed to download a Linux ISO, is all a bit of a miracle. But now I can look back on it, and I can say, I understand this. And if you want to know more about how the scheduler works, I strongly recommend, there's a link in, I'll stick up on the slides, the series of blog posts by, I think, is it Bill Kennedy? Yeah, it's Bill Kennedy wrote a three-part series on how the scheduler works, taking you all the way up from the OS scheduler through to the Go runtime. But yeah, less is more. For a project, I found myself trying to use all of the features I'd sort of encountered in the tool, right? I'd learnt about channels, I'd learnt about concurrency. Well, I should use these things, right? I'm writing Go. Chuck these in, use them for the sake of using them. And I ended up with something that I really couldn't manage and really just couldn't understand. In parallel, because that was a bit of a torture, a couple of simple projects along the side. But it was really time to focus on picking a topic or a feature of the language and trying to understand it a little bit better. And as anyone that does technical stuff and you ask them what their hobbies are, I'm pretty sure the majority will have it somewhere in there taking pictures. I'm one of them. Close to 1 terabyte of photos sat around on a hard disk somewhere, and absolutely no way of organizing them. So I thought, well, at least if I could name these files by date and possibly location. I'm obsessed with keeping track of location of where I've been. That would be a start. And I could use Go for this, right? Because when you're learning a language, every problem looks like a problem that you could solve with the language. So you open up your hex editor and you look at the images and you can see, look, it's taken with an iPhone. This isn't the hex for that image. They're two disconnected things. But this looks like something I could parse, right? I'm taking that problem that I'd faced with the BitTorrent client of dealing with all those bytes that were coming in sort of seemingly random orders. I'm trying to simplify it and build my next project. And so you turn to the spec and you start looking, and this is quite a therapeutic thing to do, is to take a spec and gradually work your way through it. But you take EXIF, or you take the sort of metadata and you try and put EXIF or IPTC, and you realize that actually images that we talk of as JPEGs or HEIF if you're using an iPhone, they're actually layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of different formats all baked inside each other. But the specs are there, and you can start at the beginning, and you can go reading bytes, and you can read more bytes, and you can read more bytes, and you can keep going. And I got there. I was able to start moving my photos around. But this really was quite a tedious process of working through the spec and looking at the exceptions and jumping forwards and backwards in the files for something that already existed, right? There's plenty of libraries out there that do this, but I was trying to learn a language and I was trying to solve a problem. The standout thing for me with this was error handling, right? Everyone loves to kind of laugh and joke at the kind of if error does not equal nil, then do something, right? It's a thing with Go for now. This for me was valuable. I started this project and I ended up trying to wrap all of these errors as some sort of generic unable to parse EXIF data. And when your sole job is parsing EXIF data, that is really unhelpful. And actually I found that this encouragement to think about how I handle errors at every opportunity that an error could be thrown was really something I could quite enjoy. This was really helping me and this was useful. And as someone that has had code written in a payment system that had sort of try-catch around 1,000 lines of payment logic and in the catch block was do nothing, carry on, the payment errors that you get with that are horrendous, and I really wish more people would think like this when they write their code, and it was actually quite nice for me to experience it as part of learning the language. Yeah, but what about some random camera model? This was great. I started this project thinking of JPEGs and EXIF data, and then realized that a huge majority of my photos are shot in RAW with a whole heap of different cameras over there, so I gave up. But code is disposable, right? So this wasn't a waste. I'd learned something. I'd learned a lot, and I felt a little bit more confident about handling errors in a language where previously all I'd ever done is sort of join in with the joke of if error does not equal nil. And I completely agree with Winnie on this. Sometimes I think coding is one of the best ways to learn Zen. You cannot be attached to it, because almost everything you're going to see here is something I've thrown away. So the journey continues. Quick aside, exorcism challenges. These are absolutely brilliant for anyone trying to learn the language. I think there's close to 16,000 people signed up as students for Go and only 40 mentors. So if anyone has the time and wants to go and write some feedback on people's code and help them learn, I would have loved to have a mentor when I was doing it. I'm now signed up, but I'd encourage people to go and have a look. And GoAL, because an electricity meter that spits out readings on as multicast on the network was too tempting to resist. But it was time for something different. Winnie, whose tweet I just showed earlier, was writing, she's based out of Singapore, and was writing about self-directed learning networks. And this is a bit strange, but the bit that really struck me about this was the way she was talking about everyone's learning paths being different. And how when you learn a topic, this question around give me the resources was always something that kind of presupposed that there was a list of resources that would get you from where you as an individual were to some point in the future. And actually everyone follows their own path. Everyone gets distracted by another technology that comes along. Everyone sort of weaves their way through the myriad of things that we have available to learn. And she wanted to explore this, and there's a whole series of blog posts on it. But I was looking for projects, right? I'm desperate, I need to learn. And one of the sort of canonical Go, how do you learn Go projects is build APIs, right? And I resisted that. I've been dealing with files and bytes because that felt more interesting. She was talking about a service to kind of store cards that were related to other cards. You could embed cards within cards. It's a sort of graph problem of a graph data structure of cards that were informations and things to learn and learning resources. And so I thought, well, I could build that. It didn't seem too hard. But what was going to make it interesting for me? Right, well, there was a lot of talks at this point on gRPC, and that sounded interesting, right? I've been doing a lot of work in enterprise where XML, SOAP, now REST. This was something new, and it felt like something I should be familiar with. So regardless of whether it was the right tool for the job, client to server, that's what I'm going to use because I want to learn it. And then, well, I've never used Go to talk to a database, so let's try 3 of them. And let's try and see what the difference is and how my experience of trying to do this. So what I ended up with, 1 project, 3 separate implementations, 3 different ways to interface the databases. As an aside, I've yet to come across, in 12 years of working in technology, yet to come across a scenario where you actually do want to rip out one type of database, replace it with another, and not completely rethink what you're doing with your data. But this is what I was doing here because, hey, I was learning. So I built this thing with these 3 different rows. And this was the first thing for me. The to-do comment was left there by me way back when. I didn't add it. Perhaps an interface might help. Why did these cards need to know anything about how they were stored? All this talk of interfaces, I'm not a developer. They exist in other languages and everything. This, for me, was the first time I realized that actually where this interface thing that people were talking about might have a role. And for me, it was that realization that I now faced a problem that others were talking about allowed me to make the connection with the talks and the blog posts that people were writing. So repetition is not a crime. Dry, don't repeat yourself. Yes, repeat yourself because, especially when you're learning, you uncover things that you perhaps might not have seen. So the journey continues. I spent a lot of time inventing or looking for any possibility to write Go code. So I needed to mask some data out of a CSV file. Well, there's plenty of ways to do that. But because it was my problem and this code wasn't going anywhere near production, I was going to spend the morning or the hour in the coffee shop to write the CSV masking tool such that I could do it in Go. Little stupid excuses to learn Go along the way. But it was time for a distraction. We bought a pair of these lights at home. I think they're floss lights. They're beautiful. They're physically, the design is wonderful. They have some problems. If you're into sort of smart home and sort of thing, the interface to these lights is Bluetooth. It's proprietary. They don't use any of the standard Bluetooth peripheral specs. They have an iPhone app that has not been updated since 2015. And if you have more than one light, you have to guess which slider to move on the phone. So I figured I could solve this. And hey, I was learning Go, so what do you do? Amazon Echo, Lambda. I think at the time you couldn't use Go to do the home automation stuff or the Echo skills. But that could call a service that I could now build, because I've done that, running on a Raspberry Pi, which has Bluetooth, right? So I tried to do this, and it works-ish. But thinking back to that BitTorrent client, I was now terrified of concurrency. So there was no consideration to it in here. There was absolutely nothing. Before I get into the concurrency piece, a quick aside. It was far easier to do this on an Arduino, not using Go. It was far more stable. The Arduino thing that I wrote still works today. The Raspberry Pi used to hang randomly and require physical power off, power on in order to unlock the Bluetooth stack. And I don't think it's a Go problem, but when you look at the sort of totality of the solution, it was far easier to do it that way than it was this way. So for this particular project, Go wasn't the right tool for the job. But don't let that ever stop you trying to use something you're trying to learn to solve a problem. The concurrency piece. If you ever say Amazon cylinder thing, apologies to people, I was about to say the word. If you ever say the Amazon cylinder thing, turn off all the lights, what you actually get is a series of concurrent requests. And when your service is listening and trying to open up a Bluetooth connection to a single device, you end up in a world of pain. And what I'd completely failed to do was to consider how that resource had to be basically locked. I needed to put a lock around it or consider how I was going to handle that. And it was only yesterday, actually, I found a great blog post. I'll see if I haven't got it in the notes, sorry. It will be in the slides that I stick online. Absolutely great blog post talking about concurrency with HTTP connections. Great, can read it, gloss over, but now that I've faced that problem, this is something that I can relate to, I can connect. So building a project that's now thrown away, trust me, this is never going to run at home, helped me make the connection to problems that people are facing. And concurrency is a problem we face all the time when we're writing real code. So some more sort of spin-out projects. That UID, trying to write three databases very quickly became apparent that generate your own UIDs, don't rely on a database for you. At work, we were doing a lot of stuff with Cloud Foundry, and it was when, this is something I was talking about earlier, time and time again, the tools we're using in our daily lives as sort of engineering-y types are written in Go. And this is a discovery that, well, the Cloud Foundry client's written in Go. I can now, with all of this sort of throwaway projects, I can now write plugins for it, and I can now be useful. So a whole heap of plugins for the excuse of plugins. HTTP testing was a real problem for me. I could not get my head around how to write. Of course, I can go and find somebody else's code, copy it, paste it. I couldn't get my head around how to structure HTTP tests. So I built a separate project just specifically to allow me to test. But it was time for something useful. And digital coin jar. So Monzo, frequent sponsor, have a digital coin jar. Starling at the time didn't. They now have a digital coin jar or sort of roundup function, but they didn't at the time. But they did have an actively developed API, and they didn't have a Go client for it. Aha, I thought. I could go and build one. And so I set out to build this digital coin jar. At this time, Amazon was now offering the Go runtime as part of their Lambda stuff, so I could now start to explore serverless. So webhook fires, transaction handler, stores the transaction. If you want to know why the database in the middle, come find me. But do some roundup, move the money to a savings pot, and then sort of transaction closed. And this works. I think it still works. I think it's, even though they have this feature, I think I'm still using my own. But that experience of HTTP testing, that tiny little throwaway project, was now something I really had to focus on in writing tests for this API. And it was actually more tests than API handling code. And it was really nice to be able to suddenly take something that was often thrown away. I think there was one talk that was thrown away as a thing that everybody got. This was the one thing that was really, really causing me trouble. But I realized for the first time in all that code that I'd written, save the BitTorrent client where I had packages coming out left, right, and center, this was the first time that I had a legitimate reason to split things into two packages. The Starling client and the application that was doing the roundup. And because I'd made that split, this was the first time that sort of packaging was a conversation that I had to engage in. I built a command line client for the bank and you could do everything with it, including see bank details, open savings accounts, move money around, etc. And for me, this was really key, is that because I'd broken out that client package, some other people were starting to use it. And so that world of pain that is the Go vendoring conversation, with all the politics and everything else associated with it, this was the first time I found myself needing to vendor some code. And for someone that writes code for a living, this is a no-brainer. For somebody that talks about dependencies for a living, I thought I got this. Somebody that was now having people depend on my own code, this was a challenge. I still don't follow the politics, but I now realized that vendoring was a thing I had to do. And so having other people use my code, even if it was only briefly, was a really powerful learning exercise because it brought home some other aspects of the language. So this is where I got to. It's about 6 months ago, and I've been on sort of parental leave since, so I haven't really written much. The bot down the bottom was the one that encouraged the comment. But just to sort of begin wrapping up, these are the things I learned. I'm not here to tell anybody how to learn. Everyone learns in a different way. I'm not here to tell you this is the way to learn Go. This is a selection, almost like an experienced report of what I've done. And the things that really stood out to me was writing less is more. Code is disposable, throw it away. Ignore people that say don't repeat yourself, particularly when learning. Go isn't always the right tool for the job, but when you're learning Go, every problem looks like a problem that Go can solve. And build things that you or others will use, even if it's only briefly, because that really does help. And one ask, next time somebody asks you how they should learn Go, or what list of resources they should use, by all means send them to the tour, by all means send them GopherBot, but take 5 minutes and help them plan that first step in the journey. Because if I flick back to that, what I realize here is my journey starts to branch out, and these things are all going in different directions. But as I start to pull this together later on, I realized I was drawing on skills that I'd learned in earlier projects. Help somebody start over on the left. Help somebody take that first step. Figure out what it is they're trying to learn, why they're trying to learn, and help them find a project that gets them started. If you're not sold on why beginners in Go is important, this talk by Natalie Pistanovich, I think she's given it twice, most recently at Go Days in Berlin. Absolutely brilliant talk. The Go community is growing at a rate of knots, and there are now more beginners than there are experienced Go developers. So we really need to figure out how to help people get started in learning Go. I've had a great time of it. I suspect there are others that could do with a bit more help. I hope I'm around and available to help them, and I hope all of you are too. So that was my quick summary of Beyond the Tour. I left out a whole lot, and it wasn't so much a disconnected journey as when putting the slides together, I realized it was actually quite connected. Things that I was hearing at the meetups are things that I was incorporating into these projects. These projects were all drawing on things that I'd failed at previous projects, and it's been a whole load of fun. So if you want to know more, come find me afterwards. Thank you.